Today we are going to begin Chapter 4 in our U.S. History curriculum. Chapter 4 is called The Development of the 13 Colonies. In this chapter, you will be studying the time period from approximately 1600 to 1740. This 140 years time span covers the development of Britain's 13 colonies in North America. In Chapter 3, you read about England and the English colonies. In this chapter, the word Britain is used instead of the word England. In the 1600s and the first part of the 1700s, Britain, or the British Empire, included the countries of England, Wales, Scotland, parts of Ireland, and all of its colonies throughout the world, including the 13 colonies in North America. Economic problems. More than basic needs. Britain's 13 colonies were the first colonies set up by Britain in America. The first colonists in the 13 colonies had to meet their basic needs of food, shelter, and clothing, just like the Native Americans. After meeting their basic needs, the colonists could then think about gaining wealth through the following economic activities: farming, more land, making things from natural resources, or trade. The European colonists used their natural resources they found in their colonies to meet their basic needs, but they also used natural resources to make things. Remember, natural resources are things produced by nature that man knows how to use. Like the Native Americans, the Europeans used what was most plentiful in their environment to meet their basic needs. The Europeans also used natural resources to gain wealth through manufacturing. Manufacturing means to make things either by hand or with machines. Europeans began to think of natural resources in terms of manufacturing. They began to define natural resources as anything produced in nature that man knows how to use in manufacturing. Economic activities in the 13 colonies. Agriculture in the 13 colonies. Before and during colonial times, farming was the main way people throughout the world made a living. Another word for farming is agriculture. Wealth was often measured by how much land a person owned. People moved to the 13 colonies to get land to own and farm. Farm families grew almost everything they needed to meet most of their food and clothing needs. They made most of the things they used in their homes by hand. Colonists made items such as soap, furniture, and clothing. However, the colonists wanted other things like wagons, kettles, axes, nails, guns, and spices for their food. Because agriculture would not meet those needs, and because the first colonies did not have stores, those items had to be manufactured by other people or imported from Britain. Manufacturing in the 13 colonies. When colonists made items that were to be sold, they were engaging in commercial manufacturing. Commercial manufacturing means making goods and supplies to sell to others. Commercial manufacturing was important because it was a way for colonists to make money. Most commercial manufacturing was done not by machines, but by people, called master craftsmen. Master craftsmen were skilled workers who knew how to manufacture special products. For example, master craftsmen used timber to make wagons, barrels, and ships. Other master craftsmen took iron ore from rock to make nails, pots and pans, tools, and rifles. Others used furs to make hats. Colonists did not go to school to learn these skills needed in commercial manufacturing. Instead, a person learned those skills by working with a master craftsman. The process of working for a master craftsman to learn his or her skill was called an apprenticeship. A young person learned a skill from a master craftsman as an apprentice. Contracts were signed by the master craftsman and the boy's father. The contract described what the master was expected to teach and what the boy had to do for him in return. Most of the manufacturing jobs that made farm tools and machines were done by men because of the customs and traditions of colonial society. Women had very few job choices outside the home. Because of the society, most of the jobs for which women could become apprentices had to do with the home, such as being a seamstress who made clothing, a baker, or a midwife. A midwife helped women give birth to their children. Trade in the 13 colonies. Once master craftsmen produced an item, they needed to sell it. Remember, trade was defined in Chapter 3 as the buying, selling, and transporting of products and goods. Again, it is very important to remember that trade is the physical act or the process of moving products from the seller to the buyer. People who move those products from the seller to the buyer are called traders. Imports and exports. Some trade goods can be classified as imports or exports. Imports are trade goods brought into another country or a colony. Exports are the opposite of imports. Exports are trade goods being sent to another colony or country. Remember, exports exit the country, imports are coming in. Multiple perspectives. Whether something is an import or an export depends on the perspective one takes. For example, items made in the colonies and sold to Britain were exports from the perspective of the colonies, and imports from the perspective of the British. On the other hand, items that were made in Britain and sold in the colonies were exports of Britain and imports of the colonies. Remember, items are exports of the country they exit, and imports of the country that brings them in. Imports and a shortage of master craftsmen. Many of the imports the colonists bought from British traders were also commercially manufactured in the 13 colonies. Why did the colonists buy products imported all the way from Britain when those same items were being made by craftsmen in the colonies? The answer has nothing to do with how good the items manufactured by colonial master craftsmen were. The colonial craftsmen products were just as good as the imported British goods. The answer is that colonial craftsmen could not make enough of the goods and products the colonists wanted because there were not enough skilled workers in the colonies. For example, colonists needed rifles so they could hunt for food. Rifles had to be either imported from Europe or made by colonial gunsmiths. Let's pretend that the colonial gunsmith could make one rifle every month. That means that he could make 12 rifles a year. The problem was that many more than 12 people wanted rifles every year. The colonists who could not get a rifle from the colonial gunsmith could choose to tolerate the problem of no rifle, or he could come up with another way to solve the problem. Because tolerating was not a good solution, colonists solved their problem by purchasing rifles imported from Britain. Trade in the development of colonial towns and cities. Trading played a part in where towns and cities were started in the colonies. Trade goods needed places to be loaded and unloaded from ships. The geographical location where supplies were loaded and unloaded was called a break-in transport. A break-in transport could be a safe coastal harbor or a sandy riverbank where the boats could dock. A break-in transport could also be an open river valley or a mountain valley that was one day's travel for the colonists by wagon or horse. After a break-in transport was established, for example, along a flat riverbank or in a natural ocean harbor, then a town or village would usually start to develop nearby. Because the first European settlers came to North America over the ocean, the earliest colonial towns and cities were built near natural ocean harbors or on the banks of rivers that led to the ocean. European goods were imported into the 13 colonies through these coastal towns and cities. Colonial goods were also exported to European countries or other colonies from these coastal towns and cities. Towns and cities that grew the largest in the 13 colonies were those that had access to trade. Water for transportation. There were no roads to travel on when the first colonists came to North America. There were only the